Hello Year 2 and welcome to your second lesson of your RE learning for this half term. So today we're going to be looking at, our learning objective is to understand which places of worship are sacred for Christians. So the success criteria for today's lesson, the first one is you can describe a church and its features. Secondly, that you'll be able to identify special objects and symbols that are found in a church, which show what Christians believe. And also you're going to ask questions about the significance of the church and the objects and the role that they have within it. So before we make a start, we're going to go through our Knowing More, Remembering More. Excuse me. So if you have a pen, pencil and a piece of paper, we'll make a start. So question 1, sacred means connected with God or a god or dedicated to a religious purpose. Is that true or false? Question 2, a synagogue is a special place of worship for? Is it Muslims, Jews or Christians? And question 3, people might go to blank to feel safe as they are a believer. So you can pause the video now and you can write your answers or discuss your answers with an adult. Right, welcome back. So question 1, sacred means connected with God or a god or dedicated to a religious purpose. That is true. Question 2, a synagogue is a special place of worship for, and well done those who said the second one, Jews. And then the answer to question 3 is people might go to places of worship to feel safe as they are a believer. So your knowledge organiser, today we're going to look at these two key words, vocabulary, church and symbols, and then again talking about that holy place. Excuse me. So words we already know, we've got the word sacred, special and places of worship. And words we're going to meet today, so my turn, pulpit, my turn, altar, my turn, font. Super. So first of all, I want to start getting you thinking about these two questions. What is a church and who worships in a church? So if you've got a grown-up or an older sibling with you, talk about these two pictures here. So how would we describe them? What is similar about them? What is different? So here are two very different Christian churches. Now this is St Paul's Cathedral. You can see the building just at the top here. And it was built over 1,000 years ago, and unfortunately it was built from wood at first and it burnt down, and we know that it burnt down linking into our history learning on the Great Fire of London, and it had to be built again, and this time they built it in stone, and many famous people have been buried there, including Admiral Nelson. So this building is called the Methodist Chapel in Leeds in West Yorkshire, and it's a really simple stone building. If we were to compare the two, what would you notice? How are they similar and how are they different? Jot some of your ideas down. Now, here are also two very different buildings. So we've got the Hagia Sophia, which was built over 1,000 years ago in Turkey. It was a cathedral, but is now a museum. And this one is actually the Basilica and is a Christian church in India. It's called the Santhom Cathedral and Basilica. And it's a tomb of the disciple Thomas, which is buried in this church. So again, if we were to look at the two churches, how are they similar and how are they different? So if we think about some of the features within a church, here are just a few. So a cross is a key image that you will see within many, many Christian churches. And it reminds people that Jesus died on the cross, and some churches are even built in the shape of a cross. Now, you wouldn't necessarily see them standing up, but if you walk into a building, often you'll get a very long corridor along the beginning, which leads up to the font and the altar. And then you'll get two to the right and to the left, two edges, which is actually from above, if you were looking at it from a bird's eye point of view, an aerial view, it would be in the shape of a cross. In a lot of more traditional older churches, you often see a bell tower, and the bell is used to remind people that it was time to go to church. And again, in some particularly older churches, you will see really beautiful examples of stained glass windows, and they often show pictures of Bible stories or key events in the Bible. When you enter into a church, you will see different types and different styles of pews, and this is the benches where people sit when they come to worship. Then at the front of the church, you will often see kind of the main view is towards the altar, and that's the table used during church services such as the Eucharist. So that's when they give Christians the bread and the wine, which is the body and the blood of Christ. You might also see organs, which is kind of like a very, very grand type of piano, but it's got a much different sound to a piano, and it's often an instrument that's used to play and accompany hymns that are sung at the time. You also see a font, which is a basin that is used for baptisms. We all know from our previous learning in the autumn term that candles are often featured quite heavily in churches, and they are lit to represent God's love. You'll also have a lectern in a church, a stand that someone might read from, so they would read the Bible inside a Christian church. And also, you will see a pulpit, which is a raised part of the church, often for the priest or the reverend to talk to the congregation, the people that have come to worship in that church. So for those of you that have been inside a Christian church, have you seen any of these things? So maybe talk to one of your grown-ups in your house or your older sibling about when you've seen any of these things being used, and do you remember them? So if we think about the reasons why people go to church, there are lots of different reasons. Some people go to pray, because in God's house, according to Christians, it is very peaceful and quiet. It gives them a time to reflect, to sing. So singing hymns is an integral part of coming to church for a lot of people. To worship. People like to worship God in church where there are no other distractions. To learn. People often visit churches to learn about stories in the Bible. To get married. People get married in a church as it is a holy act. And get baptized, a ceremony to welcome a baby or member of the family to the church. Sometimes you'll also go for a funeral. So a funeral service is held to remember someone who has passed, who has died. And sometimes people go to church just to meet friends. It's a very social place, and you are part of a group, part of a community. Okay, so we're going to take a quick tour of a church, and you'll be able to see some of the things that we've covered in our learning so far today.
Hello, my name is Father Philip. I'm the vicar of Offerham Church. I'm going to be doing this little video tour around our church so that you can see the important parts of our building and what makes church buildings so special for Christians. So come on, follow me inside and we'll have a look around. So here we are just inside the church door, and I'm going to point out the first thing that you see when you come into a church. Now this is quite normal for a church of this age. If I just pan round, you can see behind me what's called the font. Now this is where christenings take place. It's what we do when someone is baptized, and it's a symbol of them becoming a member of the church. And that's one of the reasons why a font is usually near the door of a church, because it's a symbol of entering the church. So that's the first thing to see on our little tour. When we just go past the font, we come to the bell tower. Now, if I just pan down a bit, you can see the ropes that are used for bell ringing. Now, they're all tied up at the moment, but when the bell ringers come in, they take those down and the ropes go all the way up to the top of the tower where the bells are. Now these days, a lot of bell ringers just ring bells for fun. It's a hobby, but it also has a very important part in the life of the church. It's what we use on Sunday mornings to let the village know that a service is about to begin. Bell ringers often ring the bells at other important times of the year as a way of marking special occasions. Now, just behind me, you can see one of the stained glass windows in our church. And we're very lucky here to have some really beautiful stained glass windows that we can look at. Now, in this video, you might not be able to see quite what the detail is behind me, but these are actually pictures of Moses and Joshua, who were important prophets of the Old Testament. Long time ago, when very few people learned how to read and write, stained glass windows in churches were a really important way of telling stories from the Bible and teaching people about the Christian faith. And we still have some of these stories told in our windows today. So I'm standing here now in the middle of the church, and you can see behind me the seats where people sit when they come to join in with a service. These seats have a special name. They're called pews. Now, what we have in this part of the church is a special symbol, and I'm going to try and explain what that means. This bit of the church, which is where everyone sits, is called the nave. Now, you might think that word sounds quite similar to another word that we use today called navy, which is all about ships. Now, actually, the two words are linked. If I just pan down, you can see the roof above me like that. Now, if you think about a really old-fashioned wooden ship, the roof at the church looks a little bit like a ship that's been turned upside down and dropped on top of the church. Now, that's deliberate. It's meant to make us think about the story of Noah's Ark, when all the animals went into the ark and were safe from the flood. So the nave of the church is designed to remind us of that story, that here in church, we're safe under the protection of God. Now, I'm here at the other end of the church now, and if I just pan down a little bit, you might just be able to make out just about here where you're looking, there is a step up. Now, steps up in churches, particularly old churches like this one, have a particular meaning. When you step up into a place in a church, it means that you're entering a slightly holier bit of the church. And I'll try to explain a little bit about what that means. So just behind me here, you can see what is called the vicar's stall. This is where I sit when I'm leading worship. And if I just pan round, there is on the other side what's called the deacon's stall. So anyone who is assisting me with worship will sit there. And if I pan round a little bit further, you can see that there are some benches on either side. And when a choir is singing, this is where they sit. So up here on this bit of the church, which is called the chancel, this is where all the people who are leading worship will sit on a Sunday morning. Now, behind me here is what is called the sanctuary, and you can see the table behind me. This is what we call the altar. Now, you'll notice again that there are more steps up. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we're going into another bit of the church, which is considered to be a holy part of the building. Now, you might be able to see behind me that there is what's called a communion rail. This is where people come along and they kneel to receive communion when we are having a communion service on a Sunday morning. Now, fun fact, communion rails originally weren't designed for people to kneel at to receive communion. They were actually designed to keep animals away from the altar. A long time ago, very often church buildings were open and local farm animals would wander into the church. And so these barriers used to be there to try and keep the animals out of the holiest bit of the building. Here I am in the sanctuary, and you can see a little bit behind me where the altar is. And this is where we do our worship when we're having a Holy Communion service. Now, I'm just going to set up the table so you can see a little bit about the things we use when we have a communion service. Holy Communion is one of the most important things that we do in church during our worship. This is the time when we remember Jesus at the Last Supper, sharing bread and wine with his disciples. So that's what we do as well. We Christians are also disciples of Jesus, and when we gather together for our worship, We share bread and wine and remember Jesus. So probably the most important part of my job as a vicar is leading people in worship and making sure that they can have Holy Communion. So that's probably my main role. I do all sorts of other things as well though. Part of my job is about looking after everyone in the community and making sure that they are taken care of. And that can mean all sorts of different things, doing weddings, doing christenings, doing funerals, going to visit people, coming into school and leading assemblies and all sorts of other things that I do. Now, there are lots of other people in church who do other roles as well, and they help me out. So you might know Father Timothy. He's one of the assistant priests in our benefice, and he helps me with my job. But there are other roles as well. In this church, there are church wardens, there's a treasurer, there's other people who belong to the church council. They help to maintain and look after this fabulous building and make sure that it's kept well maintained and clean. They also look after the churchyard and make sure that everything is kept in good order and make sure that we are able to pay our bills and keep everything going so that...
Okay, so your task for today's lesson is that you will have a range of different images, 4 different images of items or objects that you might find in a church, a Christian church. The word bank at the top has the words cross, altar, font and pulpit. So you're going to say, identify first of all, which of those, what does that first picture represent? This is and you choose one of those words from the word bank. And then I'd like a brief description of why is it special? What is their significance? Now, at any point you can go back and replay the video or go back through the PowerPoint presentation to help you. But I'm really looking forward to see what you remember about your learning on what symbols and objects you can find inside a church today.